name is Norman Howe, Managing Director of Azure Group Wealth, and thanks for joining us. This is a special edition of Wealth 101, looking at the top 10 questions for self-managed super funds. This is a question I'm asked quite a lot. It's all to do with control and flexibility, also being able to set up estate planning the way you would like it, and be able to buy and have investments that you normally can't have in an ordinary superannuation fund. I often get asked whether that number's been made up or it's real. Part of the reason for it is that the cost to establish the fund and the ongoing cost each year is around about $2,500 generally. So if you've only got $50,000, $2,500 out of 50 is a big chunk. Whereas if it's out of $200,000, it's pretty close to what you'd pay in a retail fund of somewhere between 1.5% and 2.5%. The industry, generally to do with self-managed super funds, is in two camps. People that DIY, they don't really need advice, or they think they don't need it, and then there's those other people that actually think that they need to take some advice. So the real reason is simply this: if you're an expert in it personally, then it's not a problem. But things like estate planning, binding death nominations, can the fund borrow? The investment strategy, how do I put that together? So the days of just buying things off the shelf may not be right for you. Also too, death benefits are a big topic these days, and insurance, so you need to make sure that you've got the right advice and you've got the right documents. It's just not a matter now of buying them off the shelf. These days, more and more licensees are forcing advisors, if you like, to become specialised and to in fact be authorised to give advice. So my tip is yes, I'd certainly be looking for an advisor that specialises, and you'll find that on their advisor profile. If they don't have that specialisation, I'd really test the knowledge of this person and find out how many of these arrangements they've actually done. Yeah, this is a really vexing question because it's quite a wide range. For example, the cost generally to set up a self-managed super fund, including advice, are anywhere from $6,000 to $8,000, depends where you go. If you're doing it without advice, then you can take about $3,500 off that. If you've got a straightforward fund and there's not much going on, then you probably need to devote about half a day a year to it, particularly at the end of the year, because you need to sign off on the accounts, remembering that the trustees are personally and legally liable for that, even though you might outsource that to someone else, the same with the auditing. So around about 2 to 3 hours at the end of the year to make sure that all the paperwork's signed and all the minutes are done, things like that. Throughout the year, maybe half an hour a month, not that much at all. That's a yes-no question. The self-managed super fund trustees are not required to actually have insurance in the fund just because there's a self-managed super fund. But what it is the trustees are now responsible for the members, and they need to find out whether the members ought to have insurance inside the fund or not. I have lots of clients where we split it up, where the self-managed super fund has very specific insurance for a particular reason, but it's often cheaper in many cases to in fact leave one of the superannuation funds that a client was going to roll over, leave that alone, because the insurance inside some of the industry funds or the other retail funds are cheaper than they are when you go to buy them retail. So yes, it's case by case, but it's not a law, but the law does say that you need to consider as a trustee whether or not the members in fact should have insurance. It's called a limited recourse borrowing arrangement. And there's lots of confusion out there. Once again, if you're not using a specialist, then I'd advise you not to do that. But typically, a super fund in its own right can't borrow money, but it can through one of these limited recourse borrowing arrangements that involve setting up a guardian or a bare trust. So in fact, any property, for example, which is the hot topic at the moment, the fund doesn't actually own that property. It's owned by the guardian, by the bare trust, if you like, until the loans are in fact paid back. So in other words, the super fund itself can't borrow it, even though it does pay back the money to the bank. So the property itself is owned by the trustee of the bare trust. Oh yeah, this is becoming increasingly so. Not every bank, but certainly the mainstream banks that we get involved with they'll ask for a thing called a financial planner certificate. And what that asks is that the financial planner signs off on around about 15 different types of things, financials, but in particular to make sure that anybody who's got a self-managed fund, firstly, is aware of their responsibilities. And the second thing is to be aware of things like if the property falls in value or there's a problem, are you responsible? And the answer is yes. Also, the other issue too is to make sure that insurance has been considered, because don't forget, if someone dies, the bank could call that loan. So yeah, the certification is very important, but normally there's a fee involved which involves putting together a statement of advice and do a proper job, testing it, running it through a model, to be able to provide proper professional opinion through a certification that the banks these days are mostly requiring. When a self-managed super fund wants to leverage, go and borrow to buy an investment property and there's a loan, then what happens is someone other than the fund actually owns that property at the time it's purchased. And depending upon what state it is that you're buying the property, there's different rules, so you need to know about that. So once again, you need to work with a specialist. But the real reason for it is that, particularly in New South Wales, there's an apparent owner, which actually is in fact the Bear Trust, and then the real owner will be the self-managed super fund trustees at some point in the future when there's no loan. So yes, that's the reason why a Bear Trust is needed. I'm Norman Howe, Managing Director of Azure Wealth. Thanks for joining us for this special edition of Self-Managed Super Funds Question and Answers. See you next time.